Welcome back to our last discussion video of Pushout by Monique W. Morris. And let's just dive right in. So our first question is, how have juvenile court schools failed to adequately respond to Black girls' marginalization from schools? So the short answer is that essentially by pulling young people, specifically young Black girls, out of the schooling environment and placing them into confinement, into subpar education system, and into a predominantly disciplinary and violent environment, this is not doing any good. This is not giving them a quality education. This is not helping them towards their futures. Some interesting statistics that Monique Morris provided in the portion of the book that was dedicated to juvenile court schooling was that 74% of girls in prison have diagnosed psychiatric illnesses. Many of them have learning disabilities. Many of them have dealt with addiction personally or have come from familial situations or at least living situations that have centered around addiction. Many of the girls in juvenile court schools have come from poverty or economically challenged areas. Many of them have dealt with sexual exploitation. And the majority of them are nonviolent offenders that are there simply on status offenses. So I think that's also a really important thing to think about when we're pulling kids out of schools for allegedly safety reasons, when the majority of them who are in juvenile prison are not there for violent offenses. So another thing that Monique noted was that all of the girls that she interviewed talked about how being in prison and learning in prison, how that was unique because specifically in prison, unnecessary force has been recorded, reported, and documented with almost all of the girls, whether they witnessed it, whether they're around it, or whether they experienced it. So learning in an environment where violence is normalized against the children, against other children, it prohibits them from being able to learn, focus, trust the people that they are learning from. Another thing that she talked about was, violence isn't specifically an issue coming from the administrators of the prison or whoever. Removal from the classroom was something that was very regular. Specifically, if the girls were not removed from the classroom, they were often punished with the use of solitary confinement, which we're learning a lot more about solitary confinement. It's hard to study it unless you're granted access to be able to do that. But from what we know about solitary confinement is that it can do a number on people mentally, and that's just adults. When you think about children and how we've already removed them from the traditional classroom setting and we've confined them, then when they become disruptive in the confined setting, we further confine them, literally putting them by themselves for hours and hours at a time. What is that doing to them mentally, especially if they're already dealing with trauma, dealing with mental illness, dealing with a lot of other things that brought them to where they are, and putting them in solitary confinement as a means of correcting behavior and making it so that they can learn better? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And yet these are well-documented phenomena that Monique Morris found in juvenile prisons. She also talked about how just in general across the board, the education in prisons is not up to par. Even when we're talking about how I live in South Carolina, our education system down here is one of the worst in the countries. excuse me, in the country. When we're thinking about prison and the young girls that she spoke to saying, all we're doing are worksheets. Sometimes we don't do anything at all. Like, I'm bored here. This is unacceptable. Even if we're talking about prison, there should be standards for what we're teaching our young girls, because we need them to be able to come back and to reintegrate into society, and if not to be a permanent bar on learning and being able to move forward with their lives. So lots of problems with learning in the environment of prison that Monique Morris found, Dr. Morris found. I pulled out a few quotes of hers from the book that I thought were really enlightening on this subject matter. She said, "Black girls are confronted with the usual hurdles to educational success in a correctional setting, the highly punitive nature of the facility, and trouble reconciling school credits." Another one, "From my conversations with young women detained in this facility, it was apparent they understood the importance of their participation in school. However, their desire to learn was quickly quashed by an emphasis on discipline, uninspired teaching, and a curriculum that was often driven by simple worksheet packets that each student was required to complete each day." A lot of the young girls noted that because so many of them were maybe in there for a couple weeks or like a month or maybe a couple months, that some of the teachers didn't really seem to care about making sure that they learned sufficient material, learned challenging enough material, because they were like, well, you're not going to be here that long anyways. But then when the girls would get out of prison and they would need to go back to their high schools or back to their middle schools, they had trouble catching up because they had gotten so far behind, or even just getting their credits to transfer so that they could graduate on time. That's another problem. The final quote that I pulled out says, "Histories of victimization and addiction, poor student-teacher relationships, being subject to zero tolerance and harsh discipline, along with uninspired and poorly executed curriculums, and the school credit mismatch, independently and together, all of these factors function to push Black girls in juvenile court schools further away from all schooling." Okay, so our last question is, what is needed to cultivate learning environments for Black girls? And this is really sort of the solution area. Sam talked about this a little bit earlier, and I will go ahead and mention it. There's really no quick and dirty answer here. You know, a lot of this requires that people do some self-education, that they learn about their own biases and what they're bringing to the table as teachers and administrators. They need to understand the students that they're teaching. They need to be culturally aware. And all of this requires education outside of what you would learn in a traditional learning environment. Another thing that always helps is money. Money doesn't solve all of the problems, but a lot of the issues that the girls that Monique spoke with, that they brought up, had to do with needing to have more time to spend with teachers or to spend with guidance counselors. One of the girls that Monique interviewed said she had been through a tremendous amount of sexual trauma. She had been raped at a very young age and then was trafficked throughout high school. And she talked about, I just wished that I had somebody to talk to a few times a week to get things off my chest and to tell them what was going on in my life. Basically, she needed an adult who was empathetic and understanding that she could speak to on a regular basis, maybe like a guidance counselor. However, I'm aware that one guidance counselor at a school, we had one at our school when I was in high school, is not enough in some of these situations. You're going to need multiple guidance counselors, multiple therapists or nurses, and many more teachers who are aware of what's going on with the student population that they're teaching. And so in order for that to happen, there's going to need to be more money that's allocated to these kinds of schools. And so, you know, money doesn't solve everything, but it would certainly help a lot in these situations. And that seems to be a major barrier in schools that I've noticed that are operating at this level, is that people don't want to allocate the amount of funds that they need and that the students ultimately need. So Monique Morris talked about 6 themes that she noticed when she was speaking and interviewing with girls across the country, Black girls across the country, what they need to really have a quality education. Number 1 was protection from violence and victimization in schools. Number 2 is proactive discussions in schools about healthy, intimate relationships. Number 3 is strong student-teacher relationships. 4, school-based wraparound services. So basically that's sort of what I was talking about, like having services where students can go and talk and get help at school for whatever, whatever they're bringing to the table, which is going to be different for everybody. Number 5 is an increased focus on student learning coupled with a reduced emphasis on discipline and surveillance. And number 6 is consistent school credit recovery processes between alternative schools and traditional district or community schools. So, this is, again, like I said earlier, this is not a quick and dirty answer. This is a multifaceted approach, and it would be great if there was one easy answer to fix all of this. And that's really why this is so challenging, is that this requires people to really put on their thinking hats and think about how to solve a problem from a multifaceted point of view. And just, hoping for the quick and dirty answer is not the solution. This is going to take teachers, educators, legislatures, parents, administrators, and students to come together. And she talked about that. She said there needs to be a culture that is built in schools that supports safety, equity, dignity, and respect. So that really cannot be a top-down approach, cannot be a conform and discipline using police officers as the only method of trying to get students to conform in whatever way that is. It has to be truly an effort between everybody to come together and try and find what works for that particular school depending upon the students who go there. So I'll end with a couple of quotes that Monique had said in the book. And the first one says, "School-based policies and practices that expose Black girls to the disproportionate application of discipline that emphasize society's dominant and negative constructs of Black femininity, can't say the word femininity, or that seek to punish them for clothing and or hairstyle choices must be eliminated and instead replaced by a pedagogy that embraces the healing and liberative power of talking." That goes back to sort of what I was talking about earlier, that students, many of the students that Dr. Morris spoke with talked about just wanting more face time with their teachers, wanting more face time with guidance counselors. Not really rocket science there. They just need more attention and, more face time with the people that they're learning from and who can help them have that quality education and learn despite all of the trauma and their past or their parents or whatever, ensuring that, even if students have been through a lot in their short lifetimes, that they can still come to school and learn. Thanks to, the tools that all the teachers and the administrators have to help them. All right, the final quote is this: "Developing a trauma-informed learning environment provides considerations for triggers and offers protections for girls and those who work with them against further harm. In such environments, there is an emphasis on physical and emotional safety." So it's both. It's not just talking about physical safety. What I think with the heightened surveillance that so many schools have, there's this awareness of physical safety. And even though that's kind of questionable, as we talked about in my last video, there needs to also be an emphasis on emotional safety. When you talk about students who are coming to school who dealt with a tremendous amount of trauma in their very short lives, there has to be also an emphasis on emotional safety. So anyways, that's our final video. I hope that you enjoyed Pushout, and if you have not read it, I would highly recommend checking it out. It is a fascinating and very educational book. A really, really important book that I think that we need to be aware of, especially as people who care about social justice and you know where the movement is going in the future. Check out Monique Morris. We'll have our videos posted tomorrow in an article. Thank you for joining me.